Who won the Battle of Gaines' Mill? In summer 1862, the Union decided to try and end the Civil War in the quickest way possible, barging straight into the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. With the Union and Confederate capital city so close together, it seemed common sense of the Union to use its manpower and industrial advantage to take the quickest route to end the war, seize the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. The Peninsula Campaign of 1862 was an attempt to take Richmond by brute force. Could the Confederacy hold out and protect its capital, or would it be overwhelmed? Victory goes to the Confederacy. The Battle of Gaines' Mill was the most intense battle of the 7 days battles during the mid-1862 Peninsula Campaign, conducted by Union General George McClellan against the Confederacy. McClellan, commanding the Army of the Potomac, was attempting to seize the Confederate capital city of Richmond, Virginia by straightforward assault. Unfortunately for McClellan, the Confederates were prepared for a staunch defense. On June 27, 1862, battle commenced again, with Confederate General Robert E. Lee taking advantage of the fact that one-third of McClellan's army, an outnumbered portion, was separated from the other two-thirds by the Chickahominy River. Lee attacked, weighing his numerical advantage over the Union forces holding the high ground. For most of the day, Union troops under General John Porter held firm, but a later arrival Confederate General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson broke the stalemate. Together, Lee and Jackson orchestrated the largest Confederate frontal assault of the war, 32,000 men, and swept the Union lines back toward the Chickahominy River. This decisive victory effectively ended McClellan's Peninsula Campaign and saved Richmond for almost 3 years. Timeline of the Battle of Gaines' Mill. Urged by President Abraham Lincoln to take action, General George McClellan began his campaign on Virginia Peninsula in early April 1862. For about a month, McClellan's Army of the Potomac was successful, pushing back Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston's army toward Richmond. On May 20th, McClellan was within 15 miles of the Confederate capital city, but paused for reinforcements after crossing the Chickahominy River. On May 31st, Johnston attacked, stalling the slow Union advance. Robert E. Lee was named the new Confederate commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, and he planned to confront McClellan. On June 25, 1862, the 7 days battles began in earnest. 2 days later, the Battle of Gaines' Mill, the largest of the series, commenced after McClellan had ordered his field commander, General John Porter, to recenter his forces on the mill's high ground. In the afternoon, the Confederates attacked after realizing they heavily outnumbered Porter's Union forces. Several direct charges were made across open ground, resulting in heavy Confederate casualties. A stalemate lasted for hours until the arrival of Confederate General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson, whose men turned the tide. By dusk, the remainder of Porter's army that had not escaped across the Chickahominy River surrendered. What caused the Battle of Gaines' Mill? The 7 days battles, including its largest single engagement at Gaines' Mill, was prompted by the new command of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Given the charge of the Army of Northern Virginia on June 1st, 1862, Lee set out to reverse McClellan's advance on Richmond. In late June, Lee attacked, trying to dislodge McClellan, although the first 2 days of battles were relatively inconclusive, causing only bloodshed rather than much tactical change. Lee realized on the third day that he had a numerical advantage against Union General John Porter. Although Porter had a strong defensive position on the high ground at Gaines' Mill, he was outnumbered, and reinforcement would be difficult due to his back being at the river. Thus, Lee was willing to undertake costly frontal assaults, which eventually succeeded with the help of Stonewall Jackson. Stakes were high, which also influenced Lee's decision to attack. If McClellan was not pushed back, Richmond might be taken quickly, ending the war and the Confederacy. If Richmond could be seized before the Confederate government could evacuate, there would be little hope of maintaining the independence movement. Why was the Battle of Gaines' Mill significant? The Battle of Gaines' Mill was significant in that it effectively ended McClellan's assault on Richmond. Although fighting in the 7 days battles would continue until July 1st, Gaines' Mill was a physical and psychological blow that broke McClellan's offensive. Later, this could also be seen as dooming McClellan's 1864 presidential campaign. Although McClellan would later defeat Lee's first invasion of the North in the Battle of Antietam, His failure to pursue the retreating army of Northern Virginia added to his failed Peninsula campaign to sink his military career. Eventually, Ulysses S. Grant took command of the Army of the Potomac, captured Richmond, and became U.S. president afterward. A second piece of significance of the Battle of Gaines' Mill was that it began the impressive run of Confederate General Robert E. Lee at the head of the Army of Northern Virginia. For a year after Gaines' Mill, until his defeat at Gettysburg, Lee was on a hot streak. Victories at the Second Battle of Bull Run, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville all added to Lee's reputation as a military genius. This led to Lee being revered in the South even after the Confederacy's collapse in 1865. 5 facts about the Battle of Gaines' Mill. 1. Casualties. The fighting was some of the most intense of the war, with more than 15,000 casualties inflicted between 6 and 9 hours of heavy fighting. Lee's Confederates suffered higher casualties, almost 9,000, by having to cross open fields against offenders who held the high ground. However, by winning the battle, the Confederates took over 1,000 Union soldiers prisoner by the Chickahominy River. 2. Commanders. Union forces were led by Army of the Potomac Commander George McClellan, and in the field by General John Porter. Like most generals in the war, Porter was a West Point graduate and veteran of the Mexican-American War. Although Porter was praised for his tenacity at Gaines' Mill, he was condemned a few months later after the Union defeat at the Second Battle of Bull Run, Second Manassas. Unlike most generals defeated in battle, who were transferred to less rigorous roles, Porter was court-martialed and removed from the Army entirely. Confederate forces were led by Army of Northern Virginia Commander Robert E. Lee and his compatriot Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson. Both men, like Porter, were West Point graduates who served in Mexico. Lee and Jackson were also Virginians and highly motivated to defend their home state. Jackson won acclaim for his actions during the 7 Days battles, but did not survive the Civil War. He died after being wounded by friendly fire in the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863. 3. Number of forces involved. John Porter had about 34,000 men under his command, representing about 1/3 of the Union forces in the campaign at the time. Arrayed against him were about 60,000 Confederate soldiers, putting the total number of men-at-arms at Gaines' Mill at around 94,000. In addition to losing about 1,000 soldiers who were taken prisoner, Porter also suffered the loss of many artillery pieces. 4. Visiting Gaines' Mill today. Today, the battlefield can be visited as part of the Richmond National Battlefield Park, which is about 10 miles northeast of Richmond, Virginia. However, parts of the battlefield are privately owned today, so visitors should be mindful of signs and property lines. Walking trails provide visitors with self-guided tours. Due to the many battles fought nearby, visitors to the Richmond National Battlefield Park can learn about several Civil War engagements. Those who spend time in the city of Richmond can also enjoy historic sites that date back to the colonial era. 5. Trivia, most decisive of the 7 Days battles. Of the 7 Days battles, Gaines' Mill is considered the only decisive victory of either side. However, since it belonged to the Confederacy, it represents an overall victory for the Confederacy in the 7 Days battles and the Peninsula Campaign as a whole. McClellan retreated from the Virginia Peninsula, and Richmond remained untaken for almost another 3 years. The Confederate victory also began the run of success enjoyed by Robert E. Lee, thwarted only at Gettysburg in July 1863. Aftermath of Gaines' Mill, Richmond stands strong. Lee's victory at Gaines' Mill broke McClellan's offensive and saved the city of Richmond from being captured. This victory had an oversized effect on the perception of the Civil War as a whole, as both Northern civilians and foreign observers focused mostly on news from the Eastern Theater in Virginia. Despite Union victories in the Western Theater during the spring and summer of 1862, including the seizure of New Orleans and Baton Rouge in Louisiana, many observers felt that the Confederacy was winning the war due to its ability to repel invaders from Richmond. Although McClellan did not suffer a catastrophic loss at Gaines' Mill, he was humiliated and blamed the administration in Washington, D.C. for not providing enough support. Due to the failure of the Peninsula Campaign, McClellan was effectively replaced by General John Pope. Although McClellan kept his command, a new Army of Virginia was created for Pope. Unfortunately for Pope, His defeat at the Second Battle of Bull Run saw power return to McClellan as the Army of Virginia was folded in September 1862. McClellan went on to win the Battle of Antietam days later, but was criticized for failing to pursue Lee's retreating army and striking a solid blow. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment.